Brindlewood was a quiet village surrounded by a vast forest that stretched far beyond the hills and valleys that framed the town. For generations, the forest had been both a source of beauty and mystery for the people who lived there. The tall pine trees formed a thick canopy that kept much of the sunlight from reaching the ground, and the winding trails that crossed the forest had been shaped over decades by hikers, wildlife researchers, and the occasional traveler looking for peace away from busy cities. On a cool autumn afternoon, Marcus Hale arrived in Brindlewood with his camera and a deep excitement to explore the forest he had heard so much about. Marcus was known for traveling to quiet places to photograph landscapes that most people rarely saw. While preparing for his hike near the edge of the forest, Marcus met Leah Rowan, a wildlife student who had spent years studying animals and plants that lived in the area. Leah knew many of the forest trails and offered to guide Marcus through one of the scenic routes that passed by rocky streams and tall pine groves. At first, the hike felt calm and easy. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, birds called from distant branches, and the air carried the fresh scent of pine needles. But as the afternoon slowly passed, the sky began to change. The sunlight faded behind the hills, and the long shadows of the trees stretched across the forest floor. When Leah stopped to check her map again, her expression suddenly changed. They had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the trail. The path they were on was unfamiliar, and the deeper darkness of the forest was already beginning to settle around them. As evening faded into night, the forest slowly transformed into a place that felt completely different from the peaceful landscape they had walked through earlier. The tall trees blocked the last traces of sunlight, leaving the forest wrapped in deep shadows. Marcus switched on his flashlight, and the narrow beam of light revealed the uneven ground ahead of them. The forest felt much larger in the darkness, and the silence between the trees seemed heavier than before. Occasionally they heard small sounds, the snapping of twigs under distant animal footsteps or the soft rustling of leaves carried by the wind. Leah tried to remain calm as she studied the map again, but the trails looked different in the dark. The forest had a way of making every direction appear the same, especially at night. Marcus reassured her that they could still find their way if they stayed patient and continued moving carefully. Although they were both experienced hikers, they knew that being lost in a forest after nightfall could quickly become dangerous if they panicked. The best thing they could do was stay focused and look for natural signs that might guide them out. While walking slowly through the darkness, Marcus suddenly stopped and raised his hand to signal Leah to listen. In the quiet forest air, a faint metallic sound echoed from somewhere ahead of them. It was a soft clanging noise that repeated every few seconds, almost as if something metal was gently swinging in the wind. Leah listened closely and guessed that it might be an old lantern or trail marker left behind from the days when loggers once worked in the forest. Hoping the sound could lead them toward a known path, Marcus and Leah carefully followed it deeper into the trees. The sound gradually grew louder until they finally reached a crooked wooden post standing alone in the forest. Hanging from the post was a rusted lantern that swayed slowly from a metal hook. The lantern itself was no longer useful, but it confirmed that people had once traveled through that area. A short distance beyond the lantern post, the forest opened into a small clearing where an old wooden cabin stood quietly beneath the tall pines. The cabin looked weathered and forgotten, its wooden boards faded from years of rain and cold winds. Even though it was clearly abandoned, it still offered protection from the night air. Marcus and Leah stepped inside, using the flashlight to explore the dusty interior. The cabin was simple, containing only a wooden table, a chair, and a few tools left behind by whoever had once lived there. As Leah examined the surface of the table, she noticed faint carvings scratched into the wood. The lines formed a rough map of the surrounding forest, showing hills, trails, and one important detail, a narrow river that flowed toward the valley where Brindlewood was located. The discovery gave them a new idea. If they could find that river, they might be able to follow it back toward the village. With a new sense of direction, Marcus and Leah left the cabin and continued through the forest, listening carefully for the sound of moving water. At first the forest remained quiet except for the wind in the trees, but after several minutes they began to hear a faint rushing sound somewhere ahead. As they walked further, the sound became clearer until they finally reached a narrow river flowing between smooth rocks. The river glowed softly under the moonlight that filtered through the trees above. The steady movement of the water immediately gave them hope. Rivers almost always led toward valleys and settlements, and Brindlewood sat near the end of a forest stream. Marcus and Leah decided to follow the river downstream, believing it would eventually guide them back toward the village. Walking along the riverbank was slow and tiring. The ground was uneven, covered with rocks, tree roots, and patches of soft soil. Marcus used his flashlight to illuminate the path ahead while Leah kept her eyes on the direction of the water. The steady sound of the river helped them stay focused as they continued deeper into the valley. Occasionally they heard animals moving through the forest, the distant hoot of an owl or the quiet rustling of small creatures hiding in the bushes. Despite the darkness, the forest began to feel less confusing. The river provided a clear direction, and with every step they felt more confident that they were moving closer to safety. After hours of walking beside the river, the dark sky slowly began to brighten. The first light of dawn spread across the horizon, revealing the edge of the forest ahead of them. The trees gradually thinned until the forest finally opened into a wide clearing. In the distance, the soft lights of Brindlewood appeared along the road leading into the village. Relief filled both Marcus and Leah as they stepped out of the forest and onto the open ground. Marcus paused for a moment and lifted his camera, capturing a photograph of the tall trees behind them as the morning sunlight touched their branches. The long night had turned a simple hike into an unforgettable adventure. From that day forward, both of them understood the forest in a new way, not just as a place of beauty, but also as a powerful landscape that demanded respect, patience, and careful attention.